Thanks to Windows on the World.
Bringing you cutting-edge news, empowering information, and no conspiracy theories on tonight's show. We don't usually cover conspiracy theories on Windows on the World, but on this show we're going to look at the theory that Paul McCartney was killed in 1966 in a car accident and somehow replaced. This is at the very least an interesting tale, and there are some anomalies which could grab anyone's interest. I interviewed Dr. Nick Colostrum, who has recently written a book on the subject. So Nick, you've just written a book called The Life and Death of Paul McCartney, 1942 to 1966, a very English mystery, which is available now. How did you get into this subject?
Well, Mark, a friend of mine gave me this book out of the blue. He started telling me about it, and this guy I always think very sensible, and he gives me this book called The Memoirs of Billy Shears, which is 666 pages, and it's 66 chapters, and gives special thanks to Sir J. Paul McCartney, published by Pepper Press, and ostensibly this is the biography of Sir Paul McCartney. So this is an incredibly strange thing. If you reflect that virtually none of the Beatles, or the people centrally involved with the Beatles, have written any biographical history. They're all pressed to. They would have sold millions, but they didn't. And this is the nearest we have to a biography. I mean, think, the most famous musician in the world, if he'd written a biography, how it would sell, right? This is the nearest we have to it. It was given to this fellow Thomas Hugh Harriot, so he actually published it and put it together, but McCartney, Sir Paul, or call him Sir Paul, gave him the material, I believe. It's written in the first person, and it doesn't go back to his childhood and who he used to be and where he came from. That mysterious time, or September 1966, you hardly go back earlier than that in this biography. He comes out of nowhere, he can't reveal where he comes from, and he rescues the broken band. The lead singer, the most popular guy in the world maybe, just tragically dies in a car accident, but the show must go on. And Brian Epstein knows this fella, ropes him in, asks him if he'll join, and Lennon then has to be persuaded. Will he go on with the band? Will he use this fella? And so it's an amazing story, a totally amazing story, that the world's greatest rock and roll band has this transfusion, this death and transfiguration story. The death of the main character has to be covered up, and this guy has to have a load of plastic surgery, has to learn to play the left-handed bass guitar when he's naturally right-handed, has to start practice, has to start remembering Paul's life history, and trying to sound like him, and it's an astonishing and hardly believable story. And I remember totally dismissing it years before as absurd, and then suddenly the time sort of came for me to believe it, I think from reading the story and then looking all around the place, and it just grabbed a hold of me as an amazing and fascinating tale. It was the great explosion, the autumn of '69, and it actually started in Detroit, the Paul is Dead story, and so blazed across the media for a short time. But the new guy was just so good in putting it down, in claiming to be Paul. He said, rumours of my deaths are greatly exaggerated, and actually, and then he turned up with his new wife, Linda, and two kids, and said, look, we just want to get on with our lives, if you don't mind. I want to be a little less famous. And the Beatles had broken up, or Beatles were breaking up then, so he put on a convincing act of being the old Paul, even though he didn't look very much like him. He's a much bigger fellow, much more bulky, bigger fellow, you know, more hair and different colour eyes, but he did put on a very good act of being the old Paul.
Yes, Nick, and Paul McCartney was involved in a car crash in 1966. So can you just elaborate on this for people who may not know about this part of the story?
Well, Beatlemania gripped the whole of planet Earth for 3 years, 63 to 66, and it was an amazing phenomenon. And you know, crowds would go, you know, crazy over the Beatles like nothing like that had ever happened before. And then suddenly, after their last American tour, suddenly the band could never sell another ticket. It could never do another public concert. Future albums it produced were all just studio albums, just in a studio. The amazing ecstasy of Beatlemania came from these Beatles, for example, John and Paul singing together, or George and Paul singing together into a microphone. Suddenly that could never happen again. And the terrific sort of ecstasy of the band playing together with a throbbing beat and the shouting fans, that was gone forever. And instead, you got something with four different, as it were, lonely people. They no longer had that togetherness, but they were terrifically talented. And obviously they made the one and only Sgt. Pepper album after the old Paul had passed away. And they made other great albums, like Abbey Road, which was their best-selling album today. But they're much more virtuoso people singing on each song. And you know, here's a bit of Lennon, his well, I call him False Paul. Song by Paul, song by Lennon, much more singing separately, whereas before they all used to sing together. Well, it's a whole story, and very much, for example, October 1966, there were no sightings of Paul. He vanishes, no appointments at all. So after the American tour, he gets back, and I did a careful analysis of the 13th of September Melody Maker Awards, and I'm totally convinced that he was not there. I mean, the Beatles won the top awards as usual in 1966, but the whole way it was reported and the staged way they had to try and make it seem as if it was everything was normal. I don't think there was any Paul present then. And then in November, you get stories of the new guy, Paul. He's with Mal Evans, who was the Beatle roadie. So Mal and him appear together, and they're going off. Oddly enough, they go off to Kenya. There's photographs of them off in Africa before he's had his plastic surgery. So he doesn't look at all like the old Paul. And then he comes in, and you get the first rather shy press meetings in November. And again, this tall, rather shy fellow they're trying to bulk him out a bit with plastic surgery because he's got quite a long, thin face. And then they all acquire moustaches. All the Beatles acquire moustaches, and this is said to be because to hide up a bit of surgery the new guy had around the mouth. And I would say by the late spring and summer of the next year, he starts to look credibly like a Beatle. He starts to look like maybe a bit like enough like the old Paul that they can appear in public. Okay. So it's very much that process. And then there's a terrific lot of clues they leave in their albums, both on the album covers and in the songs. Well, if you look at Magical Mystery Tour, the film, a colour film at the end of 67, that is basically showcasing the new guy. And when he looks, you get close up of his eyes, and they're greenish eyes. The old Paul had chocolate brown eyes. You look into his big green eyes while John Lennon is singing "Nothing Is Real," and then you see his profile, and he's a much taller, bigger fellow. He doesn't look anything like the old Paul. So, in a sense, the main mystery, the magical mystery, is that you are looking at a new guy, and he's several years older as well. He claims he's 30 years old in that film. He says, I'm 30 years old, whereas the old Paul would have been more like 25 or so then. Let's accept that it was a tragic, terrible accident, that there's some sort of bust up. Paul drove off in a huff in his smart new car and had some awful accident, and they had to get on the scene quickly, stop any newspaper reports coming out. So on Wednesday morning, papers didn't come, and then immediately the highest level of government, the National Security decreed that the show must go on. I mean, this is the Harold Wilson government, and the whole balance of exports was the British bands were the main exports. It may be hard to remember this, but British music was totally dominating the scene all around the world, and the Beatles were the #1 selling band. I mean, massive selling of every Beatle album, massive selling even before it had come out, massive ordering all around the world. And so this was such a big thing that after that catastrophic accident, the show had to go on. This replacement was far better than anyone thought he would be. That's the mystery that we have to grapple with if you want to accept the thesis that somehow his genius stimulated the Beatles, and in some sense, their albums were certainly more mature than the early ones, and maybe in some sense better. Who can say? But the albums with the new guy couldn't get that ecstasy, that absolute pure Beatlemania of some primitive, primal teenage bliss that they could get. They couldn't quite get that anymore. But you know, they made wonderful music together. Okay, just consider what Lennon went through. Say Paul was his closest soulmate, the closest soul buddy he ever had. And Paul's cheerful, cheery disposition was a kind of key to this amazing happiness of the band. It wasn't just a rock and roll band. It had some sort of mysterious key to happiness. Not quite say what it was, okay? But it wasn't like it's just an ordinary sort of blues sound. So those two, Lennon and McCartney, anything they did was going to be a big hit success, wasn't it? Now, after and he was with Cynthia. Cynthia. Now, after Paul died, very soon in November '66, he then meets Yoko Ono, and he then turns to incredibly different kind of sounds, of primal scream and a sort of generally what many people consider a sort of ghastly infernal racket that those two start producing, and those two appearing naked on an album together when both of them are sort of married and with kids, and there's a terrific wave of public nausea against Lennon for this adultery, and he then leaves England, goes off to New York. I mean, isn't that a man totally shattered? And it also becomes much more heroin addicts from late '66 onwards. And Cynthia, his wife, describes how very thin he becomes when she sees him paired up with Yoko Ono. I mean, isn't that a total change in Lennon that we see? That his tremendous creative work is almost phased out. I mean, he does one masterpiece, Imagine, later on in '71, but isn't his wonderful creative work almost over once Paul dies? Can he do anything, you know, of similar status? I mean, I would say the main evidence isn't something you talk about. You see it or you don't. When you look at pictures of Paul, he's got a whole being and charisma, and you know, he's got a relatively short fella with much of a round cherubic face. And interviews, he gives sort of one-line replies, humorous one-line replies. Look at him in David Frost interview, for example. Whereas this new guy can warble on at length about just about anything, and he's got a sort of quite remarkable intelligence, depth of intelligence, whereby he can talk about just about anything and talk about modern music and different types of avant-garde music. And he's a far more complicated fellow, and I would say he looks totally different. So it's a question of you see the new guy arriving, and I'd also say that his Linda, his true love, knows this, and she comes up when she comes up to him. She kind of says to him, she's a photographer, right? She says, "Look, I realise you're a new guy. You haven't been with the Beatles before. I see you're a new fella, and I want you to marry me, and I want to be in your band." And she could kind of tune into him, and that relationship worked so well because he didn't have to be the old Paul with her. There's a terrific duality in Paul's life, when Paul comes along, between Jane Asher, which was Paul's true love, this wonderful British actress, Jane, Shakespearean actress, who wasn't actually into drugs at all. She wasn't interested in the druggy culture. And then Paul comes along, and those two are initially an item. And it's very important to understand that. That gives him credibility, that Jane is told, look, you've got to go along with this new fella. He has agreed to rescue the Beatles. He is the replacement, and you've sort of got to be seen together. So she agrees to go along with that, but it's never really kind of true love, because he isn't Paul. And he finds it a bit of a strain having to kind of pretend to be this. And then a year or so later, when Linda comes along, it's a great relief for him that here is really the woman for him. And they can have a future together and set up the band Wings. And she helps him to be who he is, who he can be after the Beatles are broken up. Him getting together with Linda is very much associated with the breakup of the Beatles and him finding a new career together.
So how would you explain people who knew Paul pre-66 and post-66, and that nobody's ever come out and said this is a different person?
Well, people will keep a secret if it's for some good cause, and if it's for the world's best band to keep going, they will keep a secret. But as well as that, there were a lot of mystery deaths around this this great adventure. Obviously, Brian Epstein dies off, but quite a few other people do as well, and I think that's a kind of acts as kind of warning for people. Look, just realise that it is not safe to talk about this at all. I mean, I would say various groups put the stuff into their songs, like the Rolling Stones and the Who, and Donovan. They were gobsmacked by this new guy who arrived, and my book, I argue that it's in their songs, recognising this guy arrived. And don't forget, this was the summer of Love and Peace, which was an amazing summer in 1967, and the blossoming of the Beatles with this new guy, and also taking LSD, was part of this summer of Love and Peace. And so the good times were rolling. People were having a great time, and people didn't want to spoil it in this way. I mean, Paul was creating a career on the basis of being the old Beatle, okay? Now, if you reveal that story, you would totally have destroyed him. His whole identity would have been destroyed. He goes now, does a concert of 100,000 people, and the people really like the sound he produced. Well, it's okay. He's got quite a weak, shaky voice these days. But my feeling is they go because they think it's the old Paul, you know. And I mean, my book, it's not really a work of destruction, I don't think. I feel okay to me to write this book because of this biography that's come out. Sir Paul has indicated that he wants the truth to come out. He feels he hasn't got long to go, so he wrote this to help, so that the truth will be known. He has written the story and the drama of coming and stepping in and rescuing the band, the world's greatest band. And so I feel it's okay for me to come out and tell this story. Because it's such an amazing story. It's part of all our history. We all share this history we went through. We all got memories of the Beatles, and a whole lot of the Beatles songs are about this amazing process the band went through. And if you appreciate what they went through, I would say you get a whole lot of lines. For example, take these broken wings and learn to fly. Okay, that's was it Blackbird? Isn't it? Take these broken wings and learn to fly. Right, that is the operating instructions given to the new guy. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see. It's like there's somebody crashed out and he's got to make it work again. So there's a whole load of Beatles songs describing the soul drama. I mean, they were imprisoned, they were entrapped, those four. They were going through an amazing process. They were not happy, but they couldn't pull out of it. They were under contracts to stay together, they had to stay together, and they wanted to tell people the truth, and they weren't allowed to tell the truth. So they had to put it in clues in their songs. And then Lennon, even more tortured, after he made all his clues everywhere, for example, the end of Strawberry Fields, you know, you think the song's finished and then a funny thing starts up again afterwards. A bit like ambulance coming or blood being pumped or something, some funny sounds, and then, I buried Paul. And you turn up the amp, it's unmistakable. That's what he says. And the poor fellow had to deny it, you know. So he puts in all his clues and he has to deny them all. So in 1969, Lennon, the great truth teller, is forced to deny all the clues he put in. Oh no, I didn't mean that. Oh no, I didn't say. So the poor fella in public is forced to deny it all, and which I think was very, very damaging for his psyche to have to do that. So the Beatles were afterwards. They were very pulverised by this. By what they went through, and then paradoxically it was only the new guy who could really be successful. Paul was able to go on and produce Wings and so on, and get beyond the Beatles and have a new identity that was fairly successful, and the other remaining Beatles were much more shattered by it all. They're terrified of some being bumped off, because there have been quite a few people get bumped off in this story, and both of them have crazed mystery killers coming after them for no discernible reason, you know. Perhaps we could move on to the disclosure process, Mark, which has been happening from about 2007 onwards, and it culminated in the big 1 hour long masterpiece film called The Winged Beetle. Now, what is going on here? Well, Neil Aspinall, right, he's in charge of all the archives of Apple Corps, you know the company set up. Yeah. So that means corpse of Paul, Paul Corps, right? Just listen to the different meaning. Apple Corps, Corporation, Paul Corps. Now, he produces the big series, the Beatles Anthology. Okay, that's an enormous archive of all, you know, cuts and films and everything. Now he has a massive load of stuff left over, which is all kind of unofficial, and it shows, for example, the Beatles talking about how they're getting on with the new guy, for example, or what this replacement is like, or a whole lot of funny stuff about how the replacement was made to work. Okay, now he then senses he's coming to the end of his life, and he wants something to be done with all this. He doesn't want it to be just thrown away, which could have easily happened. So something called the Rotten Apple series starts to come out. I think it's about 60 or 70 of those, you know, about 5 or 10 minutes each. Videos start appearing from 2007 onwards. Okay. And then 2010, this hour-long, which obviously had massive financing. I would say in 100 grand would be what it would cost to produce that the Winged Beetle film, 2010, and that is extensive story of the replacement, and as curious themes of magic come into it, as if the Beatles are believing in magic, which somehow enables them to do this. Now, just around that time, Neil Aspinall then he retires from Apple Corps, and then a little while later he passes away, and that's his end. Now, I would suggest that was a way that you see these documents, like the Winged Beetle and Rotten Apple, have a massive load. Sorry, these videos have a massive load of documents flashed into them, maybe just half-second interval, and thereby they are preserved for posterity. Okay. I'll give you one example, if I may. When Sir Paul's wife, Linda, was in hospital for cancer treatment, cancer of the breast, I think, and there's an official letter from the hospital about the nature of the condition. Okay, this flashes up for maybe half a second on the Rotten Apple video, okay, detail of Sir Paul's wife's cancer treatment. Now, that isn't the kind of document that anyone else would have. or certainly not be allowed to use. So there's a feeling that this disclosure process is coming from the very highest level, from Sir Paul himself, of allowing this disclosure stuff to come through for the Rotten Apple. And I'd like to mention one person by name here, Mark, in this sequence of the Rotten Apple disclosure, and that's a photographer called Emilio Lari. Now, he's an Italian guy, and he was in the photography of Help, the Beatle film Help, okay? So he knew the old Paul quite well, and he speaks in the Rotten Apple about the replacement. So he's the one guy who was totally there at the time, and he talks about the car accident in '66, and he talks about the replacement being a double. Who the hell is he, this guy? And he talks about how beautiful and lovely the old Paul was, and how tragic his death is. And he also talks about how the McCartney empire, as it were, are hoovering up pictures, old Beatle pictures, because they don't want these comparisons to come out, and they tried to steal his pictures because he's the photographer. He says they didn't succeed, but his place was raided, and they tried to get the negatives of his pictures of the Beatles that he got from Help. So that is a very important bit of testimony that comes out on that Rotten Apple. So in my book, I think that use of that is totally authentic disclosure, I would say, presumably from Neil Aspinall himself, of stuff that he wanted to come out before he passed away. And this is a man who refused to write a Beatles history, okay? He was begged by the Beatles historian, would he spill the beans? No, he wouldn't spill the beans. Neil Aspinall, he knew everything that had happened, right? And I would suggest that he was involved in that disclosure stuff that has come out. I would say it's a good time for me to write this book after this disclosure process has come out, yeah.
So ultimately you're saying that this book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears, was written by a replacement Paul McCartney. Now, what do you think this means historically and culturally, and why would people now be interested in this?
Well, it's a story of kind of death and resurrection. It's an astounding and inspiring story that they could have all just gone off and moaned. They could have all just let hundreds of girls around the world commit suicide. Oh, sorry, Paul is dead, we're finished. Goodbye, everybody. And they'll sing lonely blues songs by themselves. No, they didn't do that. We're grateful to them. They rocked on after death, just as the Rolling Stones rocked on after death, after Brian Jones had gone. And we're grateful to them. Why should the public care? Well, we all love the Beatles songs. Up till now, people's response to the Beatles songs has just been, I like this and I don't like that, okay? And you have chats about people about which albums you like and which you don't, okay? But now let's get beyond that. Let's get beyond to whether or not we like it, to what it means, to the meaning of these terrific songs that come out on the White Album and Abbey Road, and so on. The messages that Lennon and Paul are putting into their songs, I think that gives us a whole new basis for re-experiencing these songs. Right, this is the Blue Album, and you can see the old Paul and the new one on this staircase. It's quite clear once you look at it, you know. The other Beatles are all the same, okay? This is the kind of archetypal part of the story of is Paul dead, you know? You get the four of them, and is this a graveyard type scene? Is Lennon the priest dressed all in white? Is this the Undertaker, Ringo, looking pretty smart? Is this guy walking barefoot? Is that barefoot because the real Paul has died? And is this guy the grave digger, George? So that's a legendary part of the story. And this says 28 if. If Paul was alive today, would he be in his 28th year? So this is part of the real part of the urban legend, this Abbey Road cover, okay? This, of course, is the burial scene, the ultimate burial scene. Supreme masterpiece which the new guy helped produce, or takes a lot of credit for. We're talking about middle of 1967 now. and the old Paul has tragically passed away and gone, and this new replacement comes out and helps them produce this astounding new masterpiece. Notice how there's a grave scene, the front, see all the fresh earth, freshly dug earth, and the Beatles, they're buried, and there's the old band with the old Paul, and here is the marvellous new band with the new guy, okay? And look carefully, you see the new guy is taller, see here he's taller than the others, whereas here they're all actually, he's much the same height. So this is the new band with the new Paul, and they're honouring, so this is, they're not calling them the Beatles anymore, they're Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and we'd like to introduce to you the one and only Billy Shears. So Billy Shears is the name for this newcomer used on this immortal album. And here is the grave being dug, and this is the left-handed bass guitar of the old Paul. And if you look very carefully, you can see P-A-U-L ? This and these are all nearly all dead people in the great beyond. So the idea is they're all there to welcome Paul, the beloved and much missed Paul McCartney, as he's passed away. Now this face here is very important. And it's very important what they've done with this face. This is a morphed image, blending the two faces. The old Paul has a quite round cherubic face, and the new guy has a longer, thinner face, much more cerebral, much larger cerebral cortex, and actually different colour eyes, green eyes. And what you got here is important to appreciate. It is a very clever blending of the two faces, and that, as much as anything else, enabled people to make the transition in their minds, or rather in their memories, from the old Paul, who they all remembered, to this new guy, who didn't actually look so much like him. Everyone thinks he looks like him. Well, he doesn't really, but that synthetic image you got there, and he's got OPD, officially pronounced dead. That's another part of the mythology. What's he got that for? And then on the back, of course, Paul is facing the other way from the other three Beatles. Okay, this is an album of probably 1964, and part of the urban legend is that this Billy Pepper and the Pepperpots, there's no faces for this band, and this might have been produced it might be the same person who then stepped in to become the new Paul in September, or rather in November '66. That's really when the newcomer stepped forward. Was he in this band, Billy Pepper and the Pepperpots? Well, I doubt we'll never know the answer, but this is a candidate. Okay, let's move forward. This is after the Beatles broke up. The new Paul, who was with the true love of his life, Linda Eastman, married Linda McCartney, and they produced this album, which, I mean, personally, I don't like it. And I would say that if you listen to it objectively, you're going to have trouble hearing the same lovely voice as you hear in the Beatles, right? For 3 years, you got studio albums made. After the old Paul passes away, you get studio albums, and who is really singing there? Well, this guy doesn't. I don't think he sounds terribly similar. But also, have a look at the inside. This is when the new guy is concerned to assert his own. He wants to live his own life. He doesn't want to be just keep pretending to be a Beatle. He's broken up the Beatles, and he's on his own now. He's in Scotland, and they make this album. And if you look at the pictures here on RAM, he's just looking himself. He's not particularly pretty. He doesn't look at all like Paul, but he's wanting to be himself and take off the mask.
Thanks for watching Windows on the World. Remember, keep watching those, watching us, watching Windows on the World, and we'll see you soon.